Hello, I've got a show tomorrow, so I need to tidy up my pedalboard and give it a bit of TLC. So I thought I would film the process because some people may be into that. I get a fair few questions about this big boy as well, so I just thought it would be of interest to a few people who ask those questions, how I put stuff together. Cool, so I've had this pedalboard for a while in this sort of general setup, so a few bits have changed. I like to add bits in and out, which tends to leave everything slightly messy organisation wise. So today I'm just going to pull everything off of this board and stick it all back on a bit tidier. I'm also going to check all the audio cables as well, just to make sure that everything is working as it should and I get a nice strong signal hitting the amp. I'm going to be testing those cables with this little one-spot cable tester. I'd recommend grabbing one of these actually, they're super useful, just less faff than using a multimeter to check your cables, and you can also read current consumption on pedals, so if you've got digital pedals and you're not sure how much juice they need, you can quickly give it a check with this. So first things first, I'm just going to start yanking everything off and unpatching all the pedals. And then I'll just put them to one side, and yeah, so that's the NS2, which I never really used to use a noise suppressor, but I just started putting all my gain pedals in it because the bands that I'm in tend to do a lot of stop-starty, heavy, quiet stuff. I also run guitars through this TS50B preamp. It's just an Ion PCB DIY jobby, but it tends to make everything sound nice, and I've since built one for every bassist that I play with because I think everything sounds better through that circuit. I've also recently added the new Audio Surplus Mass and Panic. I'm just using it as like an extreme sort of EQ shifter thing. Then this little guy is the Summoner, which is like a prototype at the minute. It's essentially just two drone voices in a ring mod, and the little junction box on the just above the pitchfork basically swaps between the guitar input or the little drone synth. It just means between tracks and stuff I can kick it on whilst I'm tuning, and I don't have to listen to silence or have to talk to anybody in a crowd. And at some point I thought it'd be a good idea to cable tie some of these cables together for a bit of cable management, but it just made things way more awkward to rearrange because I basically swap things in and out on a weekly basis to keep things spicy for myself. So I'm just taking off that deforming there. I use it in the stupidest way. I use it for essentially like a sub-drop thing before big riffy choruses on songs, so it'll take the signal and drag it downwards. And then this ring mod in the corner is the ring mod circuit from Mountain Mover, but the second foot switch just adds light dependent resistor over the tune pot, so whatever stage lights are going on make the oscillator go a bit crazy, so you can do the stupid little nu metal squiggly noises between riffs, which is kind of fun. And then that Tides has probably been on my pedalboard the longest out of anything on here, and it's just been sat on this proper dodgy riser. It's just two back plates from two 1590XX enclosures that have been taped together. Another satisfying thing about this little ring mod circuit is if you turn the tune knob all the way clockwise right up, it does like this nice little crunchy lo-fi thing, which is quite satisfying. I'm just going through this rat's nest of cables and pulling out any loose ones so I can just see what I've got patch cable wise. I like to use the Pedal Patch UK solderless cables. I feel like they are the easiest to put together, and they're super low profile and you can fit a load of stuff on one pedal board. I actually picked this pedal board up for I think like 25 quid or something. It was really cheap, and that's basically the only reason I use this, and it's obviously huge, which is a positive for me. Just going to yank these DC cables out of the way for the time being so I can get to the base of the board to give it a clean. Obviously these things get absolutely rank, so it is worth pulling everything apart every now and then and giving them a hoover or a brushing. Just going to yank these power supplies out the way so I can get a clean under there as well. In case you're wondering, I use a Walrus ATOS and a Voodoo Labs ISO 5. Probably should just buy a bigger one, to be honest, but these two are just what I've had to hand and have used for years. The ATOS as well I've reprinted with some gothy graphic, and I've also printed the drop B tuning over there because I can never remember the order of the notes with that. I'm still stuck in standard even though I haven't played a guitar in standard in years, but whatever. Left this pitchfork till last because it's an absolute nightmare to yank off. It's properly solid down there, so I'm going to have to use all my strength to yank it. There we go. It's sat on these janky little risers, which are just random bits of wood from the workshop, which I'm going to screw down so everything's a bit more rigid, a bit more solid. Did have to double check that these screws weren't going to go the entire way through the board, but they were the perfect length, so just going to cram those in. Also going to drill some holes into that janky backplate riser so that it stays still and I can bolt it into the board itself. Making sure that I leave enough space so that when I pop the tides on top of it, I can still wire in the cabling at the top without it pushing outside the boundary of the pedal board. Part of this Velcro on the base of the board was actually pulling up, and I was too impatient to glue it, so I just also screwed that back down. There's a few different spots on here I ended up just screwing into the board, but whatever, so long as it holds, I'm not too fussed. So now that everything's sort of brushed off and the risers are bolted in place, I'm just going to start placing the pedals back on the board, making sure everything fits and leaving enough space so that I can route the DC cables and the patch cables afterwards. This particular pedal is a Glowfly Episodes. So Tom actually makes these in really beautiful, really colourful enclosures, but obviously I had to reprint an enclosure and make it all moody and miserable so that it would fit the rest of the board. But it's a really fun pedal for adding a bit of unpredictability into your signal chain, and Tom makes way more interesting stuff than I ever will, so I'd highly recommend giving Glowfly a peek if you're interested in weirder stuff. So above this Earthquake Astral Destiny, I'm going to make a little box like this, so it'll be a 125B, and it's essentially just going to be a channel switcher and a reverb switcher for my amp. So this particular one that I've already got on the board just brings in this drone synth, but I'd just like to make these little things, the little utility things, just to make life a bit simpler. So we'll build up that little channel switcher later, and that's just going to sit above the Astral Destiny. I'm actually using the extra output from the pitchfork to send to the tuner, so it can just sit always on even if I'm muting it with the kill switch. Just seems to give it a strong enough signal that it's always having a good time. And I've got this Boss GD6 before the drive sort of section within the noise suppressor, just to sort of send stuff over the edge, and then obviously I can distort the repeats then, which is quite satisfying for noisier, weirder stuff. And then finally I'm just going to place this Astral Destiny quite low down here so I've got enough space to pop that channel switcher in this gap. I'm going to double check that fits with a random spare enclosure. This is the enclosure I'm going to just spray paint and build the channel switcher into, so looks like it's basically a perfect fit. It just needs a riser to bring it up a little so the jacks can find their way out of the pedal board. I'd actually built something similar for that gap recently. It's just this little junction box, because I was messing with using the effects loop of my amp, just because it's something I'd never really experimented with, so these jacks are just linked to each other basically, but just wasn't something that I vibed with in the end. But there is another little janky acrylic riser, which is two random bits of acrylic glued and taped together, so I'm going to drill through this and bolt that onto the board as well to make sure that this channel switcher is tall enough for the jacks to comfortably sit above the ridge of the pedal board. Cool, so I'm going to route all the DC cables and then I'll get that little channel switcher built. So let's get onto the cables. There's not masses of thought going into this bit. I'm just making sure that all the digital pedals are essentially getting high current outputs going into them. And then I tend to drill extra DC jacks into dirt pedals so that I can daisy chain them together. So I'm just going to work my way through every pedal on the board, making sure everything's getting juice. Right, so now that all those DC cables are routed, I'm going to go through all of these patch cables with the cable tester and just double check that everything is connected and happy. Didn't actually film the testing bit, but everything checked out is fine, so I think we're going to have to adjust some of the lengths of some of these cables, but I'm just going to methodically work my way through the board and make sure everything's connected, starting with this pitchfork to the tuner. At this point I'm having to look up which output on the Strymon El Capistan is the mono out because I can never remember. And at this point my camera cut out, so let's get building that channel switcher. Cool, so we're going to use this little enclosure that I spray painted. It's just like a repurposed thing. I can tape over the extra holes, but we're going to need 2 foot switch holes and 2 LED holes, and then 2 holes on the back side for the cables. And just need to make sure that I avoid this bracket basically, so I'll drill 2 here. I'm just eyeballing these holes really. I'm poking them with a center punch before I drill them to make sure they're around where I want them to be. And I like to keep scrap components like this old foot switch and jacks and stuff just so I can space things out when I'm quickly drilling up prototypes like this, to make sure that nothing bashes into anything else, and so that, you know, I know for sure that everything's going to fit in the enclosure. And yep, so I got 2 foot switch holes, 2 LED holes, 2 jack holes, and then I'm going to tape over these. So going to pop these foot switches in place. I recommend these Peppers rocket sockets in every DIY video basically. They are super handy when you're building pedals, so definitely grab them. They're pretty inexpensive as well, and they make life a lot easier. The amp that I use is a Marshall JCM 2000 DSL 100, so a pretty generic sounding amp, which is why I like it really, but I just looked up a schematic for the foot switch and checked. I've got another foot switch, but it's a bit bigger than this, and I've just checked that with a multimeter, and it does look like the tip's just connecting to ground, so or to the sleeve rather. So I just built up that circuit twice in this for the channel switching and for the reverb on and off. Cool, so that's all built up and we can shove this back on the board. I was laughing to myself at how misaligned the LEDs are, but whatever, I don't really care. There's one final step for this little box. I'm just going to grab my label maker and make some labels so I remember what each foot switch does. Then the last step is to just screw that back plate back on, and then we can add this in as the final puzzle piece on the board. And then all that's left to do is plug it in and test that everything works basically. So we'll get onto that in a sec.